And really there is a huge amount of uncertainty in the global economy right now. So even for ourselves, in terms of figuring out where the global economy is going, we had to take a slightly different approach than we usually do. So instead of having a baseline around which we anchor our projections, which typically takes policy actions that are pretty firm.
The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has always been at the center of global financial stability, acting as a coordinator between central banks, governments, and global markets. In today's rapidly shifting financial landscape, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, have become one of the most discussed innovations, and the IMF has positioned itself as a key actor in shaping how these digital currencies evolve. The institution is not only providing policy guidelines but also actively exploring frameworks for interoperability, ensuring that CBDCs from different countries can communicate with one another without friction. This is where the conversation naturally extends to blockchain networks like Ripple's XRP ledger, Stellar, and Hedera Hashgraph, which are already tackling issues of cross-border payments, financial inclusion, and governance. In 2021, the CBDC discussion was largely theoretical, with only a handful of pilot projects such as China's digital yuan or the Bahamas sand dollar making headlines. By 2025, however, dozens of central banks are either piloting or preparing to launch CBDCs. The IMF has published multiple policy papers urging that these projects must avoid siloed systems. If each country builds its own closed CBDC network, global trade would face the same bottlenecks we see today in traditional banking: slow settlements, high transaction costs, and lack of transparency. Interoperability, therefore, is the single most pressing challenge. And this is exactly where blockchain networks with proven track records come into play. Ripple's XRP ledger, for example, was designed with liquidity and cross-border settlements in mind, which aligns directly with IMF recommendations on creating global, bridging assets. Stellar has carved out a niche in financial inclusion, working with MoneyGram, Circle, and humanitarian organizations to connect unbanked populations to digital finance. Hedera Hashgraph adds another layer: governance and compliance. With its council-led model, backed by corporations and institutions, Hedera demonstrates how a decentralized yet enterprise-focused ledger can meet the accountability standards that global regulators and the IMF demand. The IMF's interest in these technologies is not about replacing central banks but about providing the connective tissue between them. Just as the IMF's special drawing rights, SDRs, function as a reserve asset that balances global liquidity, blockchain-based networks could act as rails for CBDCs, ensuring they move seamlessly across borders. In this way, XRP, Stellar, and HBAR are not competitors to CBDCs but potential complements, bridging, securing, and governing the movement of value. As the IMF continues its mission to safeguard international monetary cooperation, its focus on CBDCs marks a pivotal turning point. The question is no longer whether CBDCs will exist, but how they will interoperate, and the answer may rest in the hands of networks already solving these problems today. When people talk about the IMF and liquidity, the conversation usually circles back to special drawing rights, SDRs. The IMF's synthetic reserve asset created to stabilize member nations during crises. But with the rise of CBDCs, the conversation is shifting. SDRs have been useful as a settlement tool among governments, but they're slow, bureaucratic, and don't directly translate into real-time liquidity in global trade. This is where digital assets like XRP come into the spotlight. XRP was built for speed and cross-border settlement. Its entire reason for existing aligns almost perfectly with what the IMF has been signaling about the future of CBDCs: the need for a neutral bridge asset that isn't tied to the political or economic instability of a single nation. Unlike Bitcoin, which is often viewed as a volatile store of value, XRP is engineered for payment efficiency, settling in seconds at minimal cost with proven scalability. For the IMF, which oversees liquidity mechanisms for 190-plus countries, this matters. Consider a scenario. Nigeria wants to settle a trade transaction with Brazil, but Nigeria's digital naira and Brazil's digital real are not directly interoperable. Traditionally, both countries would route through the US dollar system, but that creates delays and dependency on American banking rails. With XRP acting as a bridge asset, the digital naira could be swapped into XRP, then settled instantly into the digital real without touching U.S. correspondent banks. This is exactly the type of innovation the IMF has hinted at in its policy notes on multilateral CBDC bridges. The IMF's 2025 CBDC roundtable discussions have increasingly referenced the need for scalable, neutral platforms to avoid CBDC fragmentation. XRP already has live examples of this use case through RippleNet and on-demand liquidity, ODL, which are facilitating cross-border payments for banks and financial institutions globally. By extending these rails to CBDC interoperability, the IMF could find itself leveraging technology that has already been stress-tested in real markets rather than reinventing the wheel. What makes XRP even more appealing from an IMF perspective is its regulatory trajectory. After years of uncertainty, 2023 to 2024 brought major legal clarity to Ripple in jurisdictions like the US and the EU. This means that if the IMF or its member states want to experiment with XRP as a liquidity layer, they don't need to wade through the same regulatory fog that surrounds other assets. Clarity equals confidence, and confidence is essential when you're dealing with trillions in cross-border settlement. Of course, this doesn't mean XRP will be chosen by the IMF in an official capacity. But what it does suggest is that the infrastructure Ripple has been building sits directly in line with the IMF's needs. A fast, neutral, compliant bridge for global liquidity. And in a world where CBDCs risk becoming isolated silos, having such a bridge is no longer a luxury. It's a necessity. While XRP often takes the spotlight in conversations about liquidity and bridging assets, Stellar, XLM, and Hedera, HBAR, bring something equally vital to the IMF's long-term vision for CBDCs: financial inclusion and governance. For decades, one of the IMF's biggest challenges has been not only stabilizing global economies, but ensuring that those at the margins of the financial system, especially in developing nations, are not left behind. In 2025, Stellar and Hedera are emerging as strong contenders to fill those gaps. Stellar's mission has always been tied to inclusion. Its partnerships with MoneyGram, Circle, and even humanitarian organizations like the UNHCR have shown how blockchain can reach the unbanked and underbanked. By providing low-cost remittance corridors and enabling digital wallets in regions where banking infrastructure is weak, Stellar aligns almost seamlessly with IMF and World Bank development goals. Imagine a world where remittances from migrant workers, currently costing families upwards of 7 to 10% in fees, are facilitated in near real-time on Stellar's network, backed by stablecoins or CBDCs. For the IMF, which tracks global remittance flows as a major driver of financial stability in low-income nations, that's not just innovation, it's impact. Meanwhile, Hedera brings something unique that speaks directly to the governance concerns of supranational institutions like the IMF. Unlike many open blockchain networks that struggle with decentralization versus accountability, Hedera operates under a council model with governance distributed among global enterprises, universities, and organizations. This makes it more palatable to regulators and institutions concerned about accountability. If the IMF were to support interoperability frameworks, Hedera could serve as a compliance and governance backbone, ensuring that CBDC networks operate within agreed standards while maintaining decentralization at scale. Another key area where both Stellar and Hedera shine is interoperability across jurisdictions. Stellar's anchoring system allows local financial institutions to connect seamlessly with global networks, providing a gateway between fiat currencies and digital assets. Hedera, on the other hand, excels in enterprise-grade tokenization and data management. This combination, Stellar's inclusivity and Hedera's governance, could complement IMF-led CBDC frameworks, ensuring that the system isn't just functional for big economies, but also accessible for emerging markets. The World Bank's development report for 2024 already highlighted the importance of digital public infrastructure for financial inclusion, pointing to blockchain-based systems as a crucial tool. If the IMF adopts a multi-chain strategy for CBDC interoperability, it is likely that Stellar and Hedera will be among the networks piloted for cross-border aid distribution, microfinance, or low-value retail payments. That's because their design choices are not just about liquidity but about real-world usability, accountability, and inclusivity. Together, Stellar and HBAR extend the vision beyond XRP's liquidity focus. They bring the human and structural dimensions, making sure that the next phase of the global financial system is not just fast and efficient, but also fair, inclusive, and governed with transparency. And that's exactly what the IMF will need to balance in the decade ahead. For decades, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank have operated as the twin pillars of global economic stability and development. Their mandates differ. While the IMF focuses on macroeconomic stability, balance of payment support, and international monetary cooperation, the World Bank targets long-term poverty reduction, infrastructure, and development finance. Yet both institutions are united by one reality. The global financial system is undergoing a profound transformation, and digital assets like XRP, Stellar, XLM, and Hedera, HBAR, are no longer peripheral experiments but central components of the future they are shaping. The world's financial order is transitioning from a US dollar-dominated system, reliant on legacy banking rails, toward a multi-currency, blockchain-enabled framework where central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, tokenized assets, and decentralized ledgers coexist. The IMF and World Bank cannot ignore this shift. In fact, they are already preparing. By 2025, the IMF has published multiple working papers on CBDCs, stressing the importance of interoperability, trust, governance, and liquidity. These are exactly the areas where XRP, Stellar, and HBAR thrive. At its heart, the IMF is a liquidity provider. Countries in financial distress rely on IMF credit lines and emergency lending facilities to stabilize exchange rates and restore economic balance. Yet, these processes are often bureaucratic, costly, and heavily dependent on the SWIFT system, which is both slow and exclusionary for certain jurisdictions. XRP, designed as a bridge asset, provides a direct answer to this challenge. Ripple's on-demand liquidity, ODL, system has already shown how cross-border settlement can occur in seconds, bypassing Nostro/Vostro accounts and reducing dependence on intermediaries. Imagine an IMF credit facility deployed not through traditional banking wires, but via tokenized SDRs, special drawing rights, on Ripple's private ledger, bridged to national CBDCs using XRP. Instead of waiting days for funds to reach a struggling economy, liquidity could be deployed instantly, ensuring stabilization measures take effect in real time. This use case aligns perfectly with the IMF's push for programmable liquidity, where digital assets can unlock conditional disbursements, funds tied to policy reforms, infrastructure projects, or humanitarian needs. By positioning XRP as the neutral settlement layer, the IMF gains speed, transparency, and reduced costs, while global markets gain trust in the efficiency of its emergency mechanisms. While XRP serves as the liquidity backbone, Stellar speaks directly to the World Bank's mission of financial inclusion. More than 1.4 billion adults worldwide remain unbanked, unable to access credit, remittance services, or even basic savings accounts. The World Bank has long targeted this gap, but traditional solutions, building brick-and-mortar banks or rolling out correspondent banking partnerships, are slow and expensive. Stellar's architecture is built for precisely this problem. Its anchor system allows local financial institutions, mobile money providers, and fintech startups to issue tokenized versions of local currency on-chain. This creates a bridge between the informal financial sector and the global economy. In practice, this means a farmer in rural Kenya or a garment worker in Bangladesh could receive remittances directly into a digital wallet, powered by Stellar, without ever stepping foot in a bank. The World Bank has also emphasized remittances as a development tool, highlighting that lowering global remittance costs to under 3% could unlock billions of dollars in savings for low-income families. Stellar, with partnerships such as MoneyGram Access and Circle's USDC integration, has already proven that it can deliver remittances at fractions of a percent in fees. If integrated into IMF/World Bank-led financial inclusion programs, Stellar could help achieve long-standing Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, faster and more efficiently than any legacy system. Where Stellar focuses on people and XRP on liquidity, Hedera HBAR offers the governance framework that aligns directly with the IMF and World Bank's emphasis on accountability and systemic trust. One of the biggest risks with blockchain integration is fragmentation. thousands of chains, tokens, and networks operating without standards. Institutions like the IMF cannot deploy trillion-dollar liquidity programs into systems vulnerable to manipulation or lacking governance oversight. This is where Hedera's governing council model becomes a critical differentiator. With global enterprises, universities, and organizations participating in its governance, Hedera balances decentralization with accountability. No single actor dominates the network, yet decisions are transparent, auditable, and backed by globally recognized stakeholders. For the IMF, which must balance financial innovation with systemic risk management, Hedera provides a template for compliant decentralization. Moreover, Hedera's Hashgraph consensus offers high throughput and energy efficiency, two features particularly attractive to institutions under pressure to align with ESG, environmental, social, and governance standards. The World Bank, a major issuer of green bonds and sustainability-linked financing, could leverage Hedera's network to tokenize these instruments, ensuring real-time transparency and traceability while aligning with climate-related reporting frameworks. The IMF's special drawing rights, SDRs, are an underappreciated yet powerful monetary tool. SDRs are international reserve assets, backed by a basket of major currencies, used to supplement member countries' official reserves. Currently, their deployment is slow and limited to government-to-government settlements. But what if SDRs were tokenized? By issuing digital SDRs, DSDRs, on a blockchain framework, the IMF could modernize global liquidity access. XRP could serve as the settlement rail, Stellar could provide distribution pathways into retail and regional financial ecosystems, and Hedera could ensure governance and transparency. This trifecta would allow SDRs to flow not just between central banks but also into development programs, microfinance initiatives, and emergency relief systems. For example, in the aftermath of a natural disaster, instead of waiting weeks for IMF funds to trickle down through government channels, DSDRs could be deployed instantly to verified wallets of aid organizations, small businesses, or even individuals with programmable conditions attached. This would transform how the IMF operates, making its interventions faster, more targeted, and more accountable. The rise of a multipolar world order is another reason why blockchain integration is inevitable. With the BRICS nations developing alternatives to dollar-based trade and Western economies experimenting with CBDCs, the IMF and World Bank face a unique challenge: how to remain neutral arbiters in a fragmented monetary landscape. Here again, XRP, Stellar, and Hedera present solutions. XRP offers neutrality as a bridge asset that is not tied to any single national currency. Stellar enables inclusion for emerging economies that risk being sidelined in a U.S.-China monetary rivalry. Hedera provides the governance structure needed to prevent dominance by any single actor. Together, they align with the IMF's historic mission of promoting global monetary cooperation and stability in a world where political blocs are pulling in different directions. Of course, integrating blockchain into IMF and World Bank systems is not without obstacles. Key challenges include regulatory uncertainty. While clarity is improving in the US and EU, many jurisdictions still lack clear rules for digital assets. Technology risks. Scalability, interoperability, and cybersecurity remain concerns, especially for institutions that cannot afford failure. Political resistance. Some member states may resist blockchain adoption out of fear of losing monetary sovereignty. Yet the opportunities are immense. By leveraging XRP for liquidity, Stellar for inclusion, and HBAR for governance, the IMF and World Bank can leapfrog outdated infrastructure and create a 21st-century monetary system capable of handling real-time settlement, financial inclusion, and transparent governance. The original Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 created the IMF, the World Bank, and a financial system anchored to gold and later the US dollar. Today, the world stands at the brink of another transformation, one where digital assets and blockchain networks underpin global finance. In this new era, XRP, Stellar, and HBAR are not speculative side projects. They are the building blocks of a system that could redefine liquidity, inclusion, and governance. For the IMF, they represent tools to deliver faster and more effective stabilization. For the World Bank, they provide a pathway to deeper financial inclusion and transparent development finance. And for the world's citizens, They promise a future where access to the financial system is not a privilege but a right. The IMF and World Bank have the chance to architect a new digital Bretton Woods, one that reflects the realities of the 21st century. The question is no longer whether blockchain will play a role, it's which networks will define the rules of the game. And as it stands, XRP, Stellar, and Hedera are already waiting in the wings.